Explain to me a little bit of the theme you'd like to talk about.
Well, probably it's just the book. I'm going to talk about your decision to go to Notre Dame, meeting Ara, talk about some of your teammates.
Okay.
Talk a little about Ara's philosophy, your decision to title the book Ara's Nights, your notion of the driven spirit, what that meant. I'd probably talk in detail about the game, the 73 game.
Okay.
But then, it's your interview, so if there's things that I don't talk about that you think should be on
Known about him.
Yeah.
Sure.
Just jump in. But it's very informal. This is Mark Cave with the Historic New Orleans Collection. It is December 31st, 2023, and we're celebrating the induction of Ara Parseghian into the Sugar Bowl Hall of Fame. And what is your name?
Frank Pomarico.
And how do you spell Pomarico?
Pomarico.
And you had written a biography or a book on Ara that talks about your time at Notre Dame, but also about his philosophy as a coach and as a person. Talk a little bit about yourself, like where you were from and your interest in football.
Well, the way it started out, I was a freshman in high school, and there was a fella that was a couple of years older than I was at a place called St. Francis Prep, and his name was Larry DiNardo. Larry was valedictorian of our high school, and he was going to Notre Dame. Now, Larry could have went to any of the academies, or Harvard or Yale, but he chose Notre Dame because of the academics, and also because they played great football, but mostly because of Ara Parseghian. And I think the reason for that was because Ara was a special kind of personality, somebody that wasn't your friend, but he was more your mentor or your father, that somebody could look up to, that was very focused, and somebody that had a plan for their own life to help other people. So that's where the origins of my desire to go to Notre Dame started. We thought Larry was a great individual, and we wanted to be as close to him as possible in regards to how he approached life. And his brother was a classmate of mine at Our Lady of Grace grade school, and at St. Francis Prep also. So we grew up from the 5th grade all the way through high school. Then I came to Notre Dame, and Jerry went to a year of prep school. Jerry is a former coach at LSU and a dear friend of mine to this day. Then he came to Notre Dame a year after. So in 1972 and 1973, we were the guards at Notre Dame.
Talk a little bit about where you grew up. Talk about the town and your family.
I grew up in a place called Howard Beach, Queens, originally from Brooklyn, in 60th Street, 12th Avenue, which is near Borough Park, Bensonhurst area. Ethnically very Italian area. We moved out to Howard Beach, which seemed like we were in the country, because from Brooklyn it was all clustered with buildings and no green anywhere. We go out to Queens, and in Howard Beach we had a lawn in the front, we had a lawn in the back, and we had open spaces, so to speak. I don't know if it's as open now as it was 55 years ago, but it was a nice place to grow up. And we had a diverse population of Italians, Irish, Jewish people. We had a good mix of people there, and we were all kind of families that were looking to have our kids go to college. I mean, my parents wanted us to go to college, and Jerry's family was the same way. Our fathers were both New York City policemen, and we were people that were under a lot of discipline as young boys. I remember our first day at St. Francis Prep. Brother Williams, it was an all-boys Catholic school. Brother Williams said, if we give your son a whack and you don't like it, you take him out of school today. My father looked at me and says, I like this place. This is a good place. I think what he wanted to make sure that I was going to be in a place where not only were he looking out for me, but the brothers were looking out for us as well. And we were going to do good things, develop good skills and character, and play great sports. So that was the kind of upbringing we had. Our mothers were really hot, fiery Italian women. Jerry's mother was named Mary, and so was mine. They were good moms and very Italian, great cooks. We had an easy time gaining weight, that's for sure.
You were Catholic growing up?
Oh yes, went to Lady of Grace grade school and went to Our Lady and St. Francis Prep High School, and then of course we went to Notre Dame. So we were Catholic all the way through.
And did people see Notre Dame as their university?
Catholics, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think Notre Dame represents the Catholic population in the United States. I mean, it's a beacon of light as far as Catholicism is concerned, but I think it transcends that, really. I think it's really a beacon of hope for a lot of people when they see Notre Dame. The campus is immaculate. I live about a mile from the campus. I walk my dogs there every day, Bo and Patty. And the students know Bo and Patty because they always know when about the time I'm walking them through, they want to pet them. But it's a place that we have a grotto right behind the church, Sacred Heart Church, and it's kind of a replica of Lourdes. And it's not really a Catholic place. I think it's more of a place of peace. And people from all of the religions can go there and feel that sense of peace. It's a nice place.
Were you a guard in high school?
I was a tackle in high school, and I played offense and defense in high school. Everything we did, though, we would try to mimic what Larry was doing with the techniques he learned at Notre Dame. And when I got to Notre Dame, I was actually ahead of a lot of guys because I knew exactly the way they wanted to block, and I was working on it from my freshman year in high school. So I had a pretty good hold on what they wanted, but I think it really comes from an inner strength of wanting to prove that you can get to your goal. And every day I thought about what it would be like, trying to visualize what it would be like to play at Notre Dame. What it would be like to wear that gold helmet and be part of Ara's team. Because Ara represented not just a football team, he represented a culture of focus, a culture of caring, a culture of being part of a family that was unique, that was special, that was elite. So that was something that I wanted to do. And all my energy was geared to that. Every weightlifting session I did was geared to getting stronger to play for Ara. Every mile I ran, every game I played in, every academic course I took was all geared to getting to my goal. I think when you look at the word discipline, you look at finding out everything you can possibly do to reach your goal. And that was it. And socially, I also tried to be upstanding, because if you were socially fit, you were physically fit and academically fit, you would enable the opportunity to happen. Now, it had to happen they had to like you in order for the opportunity to happen. But I wanted to be ready if that opportunity appeared. And I was.
Talk about your first meeting with Ara.
My first meeting with Ara was when I was recruited in the 1970, probably in the spring of 1970. And he said, we really like the way you play football. You can clearly see that you know some of the techniques that we teach here at Notre Dame. But he says, right now we're not quite sure. I wasn't the biggest guy. I was probably about 6'1", about 220 pounds at the time. And the players that they had were about 235 to 240. Which nowadays almost sounds ridiculous that people would play offensive line at that size. As a matter of fact, I met one of our offensive linemen at Notre Dame. He was 6'7", 325 pounds. So when you think about that, it has been 50 years ago, but the kids are really bigger nowadays. But anyway, he said that this is something that we're going to wait. So by the end of the spring, I hadn't heard. And then finally, at the end of May, I was the one that got the last scholarship to get to Notre Dame. At that year, they gave out 41 scholarships, and I was number 41. So.
Talk about your teammates on your team.
Well, the 1973 team, well, let's start with the 1971 team. In the 1971 team, I was the only sophomore to start the first game against Northwestern. And I don't think it was because I was the greatest athlete in that class. I think it was because that's where they might have had the greatest need. And they had graduated 2 offensive linemen, Larry Donato and Gary Koss. So they were looking for guards. And I was stronger than the upperclassmen, and I was a little bit more aggressive than they were. They had more knowledge about playing the game than I did, though. And but Ara wanted to go with me, and I was excited about that. The thing I remember about that sophomore year is the support I got from people like Dan Novikov, who was our center, and Jim Humbert, who was the fellow that played next to me at tackle. Now, later on in the year, Jim got hurt, and I was joined by another tackle who was a sophomore. His name was David Casper. David Casper goes on to become a consensus All-American, also goes on to become a Hall of Fame college and Hall of Fame pro. He was a tremendous tight end for the Oakland Raiders. So Dave was a very, very good athlete, an extremely smart guy too. And he would have things figured out, helped me a lot, because I was not nearly as football savvy as David was. But he helped me a lot during that year, and then he was moved to tight end the next year. But we had a good relationship. And also the other fellas on the team that were inspiring me were the defensive players. We had Walt Patulski, Mike Kadish. We had guys like Jim O'Malley at linebacker, Jim Mazurka. These were guys that were, Kenny Sleezes at safety. These were guys that really were pulling for younger guys to do well. Rich Tolman was another guy, linebacker. So all those guys really helped me. Then in junior year, we had a new addition to the offensive line, which was Jerry Donato. He got a scholarship a year later because he went to your prep school. And he joined me as the right guard. I was the left guard. And we changed the offense that year. We did a lot more pulling. We had the wing tee set up where we used a lot of misdirection, a lot of play action passing. And we had a really good quarterback, too, that came in as a sophomore. His name was Tommy Clements. Tommy Clements goes on to do very well that year. We played in the Orange Bowl, got killed by Nebraska 40-6. But he had a great year. And then the next year, of course, we wanted to prove that we weren't that bad as the 40-6 defeat in the Orange Bowl. And we started out by working hard in the spring, and then coming to the fall, we want every game that we played, we wanted to prove that we weren't that bad as the way we played against Nebraska. And now we come to our big game against Southern California, who had won the national championship in '72 and won it in '74, and we won it in '73. And they had a fabulous team with Pat Hayden, Lynn Swan, Anthony Davis on offense, and on defense they had Artemis Parker, guys named Richard Wood, Gary Jeter, who was a great defensive tackle, only a freshman that year. But we won that game 23-14. And at that point, we realized, hey, we really have something here. And if we keep focused and we keep playing hard and winning, which was Ara always said, if you keep winning, good things are going to happen. So the year went through, and we beat Air Force on Thanksgiving Day, which was, I think, one of the last times Notre Dame's stadium was not full. It was Thanksgiving Day, and a lot of students went home. So we had, instead of 59,000 in that old stadium, we had about 57. So it wasn't quite full. But we had the win, and the next Friday, the next day, we had a meeting. And Ara said, everything is set up now, we're 10-0. He says, we might have a chance for a really good bowl game. He says, right now, all we have to do, we were like number 4 or 5, and Oklahoma was on suspension from winning the national championship, going to a bowl game. They were undefeated as well. Alabama was number 1, I believe, at the time. Ohio State and Michigan were right there, maybe 3rd and 4th. Ara said in the meeting, we have to just pray that Ohio State and Michigan tie. Now, how likely is that? You know, it never seems to get a tie. Next day, Ohio State and Michigan tie, and we're up to play Alabama in the Sugar Bowl. So it was a dramatic way we got there, but we got there, and we were happy about it.
Talk about Tom Devine.
Tom Devine? Tom Devine was a Michigan Player of the Year 2 years in a row when he was in 69 and 70 in high school. He was my roommate at Notre Dame. As a matter of fact, he was a good-looking guy, about 6'3", about 220 pounds, really good movement. He was a tough guy, really a clean player, but a guy who really played hard, and was a nice person. It's how I met my wife, too, because she used to come down from Western Michigan and meet her girlfriend, Mary Beth LaFear, over at St. Mary's, and then they used to come over and visit with Tom at parties. And that's how we first met, and that will be 50 years ago this May that we've been married. So Tom was very instrumental in me meeting my wife and really getting me my life partner, which has been, I got the better half of that deal.
Talk about why you titled your book Ara's Nights.
I was interviewed about 13, 14 years ago by a fellow who said to me, what was it like playing for Ara Parseghian? I said, well, it was like playing for royalty. Ara was like our King Arthur, and we were his knights. The guy said, wow, what an interesting concept for a book. I said, yeah, I've been thinking about doing something. I had all this information in my head that I wanted to bring out. And I shortly after that had a serious operation where they had to go inside my chest and fix an aneurysm. And afterwards I said, well, if I'm going to do this book, I better do it pretty soon because I don't know if I'll be around. Well, that was 13 years, 12 years ago, 10 years, 11 years ago actually. 2011, I'm losing time now, so I guess it's about 11 or 12 years ago. And I started off on this journey with Ray Seraphin, who was a Notre Dame grad as well. And we put our 3 years in interviewing different people. We didn't do it every day, but we were thinking about it every day. And in particular, I had people that I wanted to interview for sure to get the feel of what Ara was like, from coaches, from former players at Northwestern, at Miami of Ohio, and at Notre Dame. And what we found out is that they will all seem like they were teammates of ours because we were all treated the same way by Ara. Ara was a very interesting guy in that he was looking for people that had faith in themselves. They had a beacon of light that would show through them. This was something that there's a flowing of a consciousness from up above, our Creator, that flows through all of us. And we have this goodness that's inside of us. And to be able to share that with other people. Every good thing we do, I believe Ara thought, was given to us from our Creator. And I think that was really important because it's something that transcends football. When you were recruited by Ara Parseghian, you were recruited not to a football team, you were recruited to his family. And he felt that if I'm going to offer this person an opportunity to be in my family, I want to make sure that he is the kind of guy we want around my family, my daughters, my wife, and somebody that's going to be a positive person and do positive things for not just himself, but for others. The message from Ara Parseghian is to make a difference in other people's lives. But he also worked on our pride. I mean, we had a lot of pride because he worked us hard. Not crazy, but hard. And I think anytime you work real hard at anything, you have pride about it. And that was something that was very obvious with Ara. You know, he wanted you to work out in the off season, but he knew there were some guys he didn't have to worry about. He knew there were some guys that were going to go even way overboard than he would do. But he liked the idea that guys were playing handball or basketball, something that would work on their athleticism. He wasn't a big weightlifting guy, but he thought weightlifting was good. He thought it was something that could improve somebody's strength and also their athletic ability by being able to push harder or to jump higher or run faster. But anytime you use weightlifting, the tendency is to go overboard with it. And it tightens people up. Ara didn't like that aspect of it. But he liked, for instance, he liked Nautilus machines because it worked on flexibility as well as it worked on strength training. But the old-time just grunt weightlifting, he wasn't a real fan of. He'd rather guys play handball and work on their dexterity and also their movement. That was the thing that he was most interested in. And quite frankly, it's not a bad way to think, because a lot of times people get involved in so many outside things as far as weightlifting is concerned, which could lead into the steroid use or whatever as far as enhancing their strength, that could hurt people for the long term as opposed to helping them. So weightlifting is good in moderation, and but all those other things should be used as well. The other thing, like I mentioned before, he was very much into discipline, being focused and finding out everything you could possibly do to be a successful person. And that also meant that not just on the football field, but that also meant in how you approached life. The things that you were going to do as far as learning how to articulate yourself to other people, by bringing out your own feelings to other people, by making sure that you weren't being a bully to other people, by inviting them into your group as an upperclassman, inviting younger classmen, telling them the ropes before they had to experience it on their own. So these were all things that Ara was interested in. The last thing that was so obvious what he did was that he was somebody that was fair. Every night they used to talk about every player on the team. And you think about that, you say, gosh, how could you talk about every player? He said, well, we didn't talk about players for a long period of time. We may just talk about a minute or two, but they go around a table and talk with the assistant coaches about so-and-so. How is Joe Smith doing today? He did okay. You know, he had a fight with his girlfriend, so I heard this through the grapevine. So there may be a reason why he had a bad day. Maybe his father passed away. Maybe his mother has cancer. All these kind of different things that they were trying to find out, not just about the football player, but about the person's life. And Ara would make decisions always with a pool of information, an educated decision. And when you make an educated decision, it's much likely to be the right decision. Now, he always pulled the trigger, meaning the buck stopped with Ara. But he got information from assistants, from captains, and from other players. So he was somebody that was fair. And anytime somebody is fair, you have a tremendous amount of loyalty to that person.
You used the term in the book, driven spirit. What did you mean by that?
Well, I think the driven spirit, for me, was everything that I could possibly do to get to my goal. And I think there's when you talk to a lot of people that are successful athletes, you find that they are driven. There's so many things that they could be bombarded with as far as outside interest, but they push them away because they're focused on getting to their goal. You know, when I think about, I watched a movie called The Last Dance with Michael Jordan, and when you talk about somebody that's driven, I could identify with that, because even though I never played at the level that Michael Jordan did, but I identified the idea of being so focused that everything you did was to get to your goal of getting to the top of the mountain. And the top of the mountain could be that you're a starter at Notre Dame, or it could be that you win a bowl game, or it means you win the national championship. And all those things were all pulled in together. And like I said before, every rep I did in the weight room, every mile I ran, every handball game I played was all geared to getting to the ultimate goal of getting to the top of the mountain, whatever that top of the mountain is.
Talk a little bit about the religious nature of Notre Dame, like having a team priest and morning masses, and did the players really buy into that?
Well, I think the advantage of the religious aspect of it, I'll give you an example. We had, in those days, we slept at the night before a game, we slept at Moreau Seminary, which is on the other side of the lake from the Dome. And the priests that were learning to become priests, they would vacate their room, and we would use their room for the night. And the next, we would watch a movie over there. They had a movie theater. And Ara was big into Westerns or just kind of action movies. And it kind of got your testosterone up, really high. And then we would have, snacks afterwards. Like, and when I say snacks, we would have fruit, apples, bananas, that kind of thing. And then we'd go to bed. And then the next morning we'd get up and we'd walk around. We'd have mass right at the monastery. At Moreau Seminary. And then we would all get a medal that signified that you were going to be on the dress team. And you knew how many games you dressed for by how many medals you had. I still have my medals in a pouch. I have about 27 of them because I missed 4 games as a senior when I ripped my ankle in half. But I was able to come back the second half of the last 7 games of the season. But the thing is, you had that part of the religious aspect that got everybody together. Whether you were a Protestant, Jewish, we didn't have too many Jewish guys on the team, but or Catholic, you're all one. And that was the thing that Ara was into, the concept of being unified. And if you're unified, it doesn't matter what religion you are, because really there's one God. There's one consciousness that flows through all of us, through the same Creator. And that consciousness it has all the positive things we need to be successful. There's a song, it says, when you believe, you can move mountains. And that's a great expression, because physically moving a mountain is not going to happen. But physically having a 13-year-old who's kind of a chubby little guy from Brooklyn, New York, to be able to get to a point where you're playing at Notre Dame. I mean, this was a huge achievement. And you moving a mountain, well, I got to the top of the mountain by doing that. And everything I did was because I believed in myself. And I believed in the Creator giving me the opportunity and the energy to get there. Now, that sounds a little bit odd and not very religious, but I think much more spiritual. And I think that's what Ara was into. Spirituality as opposed to differences in traditions. And that's what religions really are, a difference in traditions.
This is a bit of a sidebar, but I wanted to get your recollections of the 1971 game against LSU. And Ara had given you permission to go to New Orleans to party.
Well, that was after the game, not before the game. LSU was a tough game. We played at Death Valley in LSU, and they had a great team. We were a pretty strong team, running team at that time, and we felt we had some bad calls early on that we had scored in the first quarter, actually. And it might have changed the complexion of the game. I think the final score was like 28-8, if I'm not mistaken, something like that. But LSU was very good defensively. They had a guy named Ron Estee, who was a tremendous player. He was also a really nice guy, too. I got to meet him when I played in Canada. He played for the Edmonton Eskimos, and we were both a part of a Fellowship of Christian Athletes, and he was a really nice guy. Warren Capone was another guy. They had a fella named Tommy Casanova at defensive back, a great player. And then on offense, they had Burt Jones, Hall of Famer. You know, he was a great player. Cantrell. They had Andy Hamilton. They were really good players, and they were ready for us. We were back on our heels. It might have made a difference if we scored in that first quarter, and I think we did, but you know, we didn't get the call, and we went on and had a tough time in that game. We didn't have Tommy Clements at quarterback. We had our first team guy got hurt, and we were like on our third team guy at that time. But you know, inexperienced guy. I think he was a sophomore at the time, and they got the better of us in that game.
What do you remember from New Orleans?
Well, I remember it was you know, a huge party atmosphere going down Bourbon Street. Something, you know, being from New York City, you're kind of used to crowds and stuff like that, but you know, it was different. I mean, it was festive, fun. I enjoyed it. I liked it. You know, I came back a couple of years later, and then a couple of you know, decades after that, my son played in the Sugar Bowl in 2012 for Michigan. So I came down to watch that game too. And every time I've been here, the food is always fantastic, and the atmosphere is always very festive and fun. I enjoy it. Plus, if there's something about the accents here that remind me very much of the New York, Rhode Island kind of influence. Maybe it's a French influence, I don't know. But there's a lot of the people that here sound like New Yorkers and vice versa, you know, so.
1973, or going into that Sugar Bowl, you know, New Orleans, like many southern cities, were very slow to adopt the civil rights legislation and integrate their institutions, and the Sugar Bowl was under a lot of pressure to integrate its membership, and that was sort of playing out prior to you coming. And I know in your book you talk a little bit about Ara and his interest in politics and the way he dealt with issues. Talk a little bit about that and the era that you were playing in.
Well, if you go back a little bit, in doing the book, I talked to Terrell Burton at the University of Michigan. He was an assistant coach there. And I knew who he was. I didn't know if he knew who I was. So I called him and I says, Coach, my name is Frank Pomarico, and I played for Notre Dame. He said, oh, I didn't know that. He said, yeah. I said, I'm doing a book on Ara Parseghian. He says, really? He says, I didn't know you knew Ara. He said, I played for him in 71, 2, and 3. He said, oh, great guy. And I said, well, I'd like to talk to you about your time with him at Miami of Ohio. He says, well, there was a lot of things going on in those days, but you probably don't want to hear about all that racial stuff. I says, no, I do. He said, so he proceeded to tell me that a couple of times that they were invited to a bowl game in particular this one time, and they were told that the players would stay at this hotel, but the black players would eat here and the white players would eat here. And Ara said, what are you talking about? He says, we're a team, we do everything together. He says, well, here you're not. Ara says, hey, listen, we're not playing in this game. Ara was not into the financial aspect of things. He was into what was the right thing to do. So he pulled out of that, and the AD backed him, which I thought was tremendous. So, you know, by the time we got to Notre Dame, there was a lot of things going on in the late 60s about race wars and Martin Luther King getting killed, JFK getting killed, and RFK getting killed, which was all for building civil rights and that everybody should have a fair shot. Ara was colorblind when it came to picking players to play. He would get information from everybody. He was more interested in the character of people than he was their skin color. So the best player was going to play, and he would get information from assistants. He would get information about their personal life and the things that they were doing, because he didn't want to have thugs on his team either. He wanted people that were all part of his family, like I talked about. And every player we had was somebody that was a special guy. I don't care if you were white, black, yellow, or whatever. You were somebody that, if Ara felt that you were part of his family, you had to be a pretty good guy. So, I mean, that's the only thing really I can say about that. There were some times, and there were some incidences at Notre Dame involving black guys and white guys that would have some kind of a conflict. And whatever happened, it was always a situation where Ara looked at it objectively and said, this is right and this is wrong, and we're going to do things accordingly. I think in 1974, there was a situation where there was 5 or 6 black fellas that were thrown off the team. Ara fought like crazy to get them not expelled for life. So they had to sit out a year, and then they were able to come back the year after. And those guys were very instrumental in winning the 1977 national championship. So Ara was always looking out for the person, for the future, as well as for the person and the team now.
Talk a little bit about Tubby Raymond's offense, the offense that you played.
Tubby Raymond's offense. Okay. Ara went to visit Tubby Raymond. He was the head coach at Delaware, I believe. And he ran this wing T offense, which was basically using the fullback to dive up the middle and either faking it to him and then giving it to the halfback, which would go for a sweep or a drive-off tackle. And the staggering of faking to the fullback would freeze the linebackers. And when they did that, the offensive line could get the angle on the linemen and the linebackers, and therefore opening up a hole. Now, the other thing that happened was you had to have a quarterback that was not only intelligent, but also could act out the part of faking. And the best one we had in his 11 years at Notre Dame was Tommy Clements. I mean, he was a master at this. He was somebody that didn't have the greatest stats as far as passing, didn't have the greatest stats as far as running or power football, but he was somebody that was very extremely competitive. Just to give you an idea of his athletic abilities, this was a guy who was offered a scholarship to play point guard at North Carolina for Dean Smith. So you knew the guy was a tremendous athlete. He also could have played in the pros at shortstop in baseball. I mean, he had all kinds of talent. Very quiet, a very studious guy, graduated near the top of his class at Notre Dame Law School. In between playing up in the CFL and the Canadian Football League, where he threw for 4,000 yards a year. I mean, he was a tremendous thrower. He just didn't do that at Notre Dame. You know, he was somebody that could articulate exactly what Ara wanted on the field. And to do that, you had to have somebody that understood offenses and defenses. And Tom was that guy. He could see what Ara was seeing from the sidelines. And the thing that Ara had that was really special as well, is he had a cadence that would throw the defense off. So for instance, if he called odd in the beginning of the cadence, he'd say odd 42, odd 42. That could mean a direction, left or right. Or it could mean a blocking scheme. It's according to what series Ara was calling. If he called fullback base, then that was a block from the guard to pull out and hit the end. If it was high-low, that means that we were going left and not right. So the defense could never figure it out. The problem is Donardo and Pomarico couldn't figure it out either. And sometimes we'd ask Tommy Clements, Tom, which way are we going? He'd say, go left. He was really a tremendous competitor. If I would say Ara was King Arthur, I would say Tom Clements was Sir Lancelot. I mean, he was somebody that could actually be on the same level academically and also athletically, mentally athletically, with Ara. And he's been a coach in the NFL for the Packers for the last 20 years or so. Tutored Brett Favre, Aaron Rodgers, and now is with Love, coaching there. And he's 70 years old, but still is a very competitive guy and a very sharp individual.
You had walked us through the 72 season. Talk about learning that you were going to the Sugar Bowl.
I'm sorry, could you say that again?
Talk about learning that you were going to the Sugar Bowl.
The journey?
Or learning from, did Ara tell you that you've been invited to the Sugar Bowl in 72?
Yeah, in 72 or 73 now?
For the 73 Sugar Bowl.
Okay, at the end of the, we had the meeting on Friday, and they told us, let's all pray that Ohio State and Michigan tie. And of course they did. So we knew that we were up. And unless some unforeseen thing happened, we were going to be playing Alabama for the national championship. And Alabama, from what I understand, Ara and Bear had a relationship that they could talk to each other about a number of different things. And Bear wanted to play Ara. And when you look at the grand scheme of things, the setup for the game was tremendous. Of course, you have the North against the South. You have the Catholics versus the Baptists, even though Ara wasn't even Catholic. I think he was Presbyterian. But you had these scenarios happening, and then you had two storied programs that for years had been successful and winning. And then you were going to go head to head and playing this game in the Sugar Bowl. And then you had Ara and the Bear, two tremendous personalities that were going to play against each other. And the forces and the cultures were clashing. And the tide of Alabama and the force of Notre Dame coming together made this a classic from the beginning. We were hoping that we would be able to stay close in the game at first. We knew what kind of explosive offense they had, and they had an extremely tough defense. And we performed very well in the beginning of the game. And defensively, our defense held to their offense to 0 yards in the first quarter. And I think going into the halftime, the score was very close. It might have been 13-7 or something like that. But we scored first. And then on a kickoff return, we had Al Hunter won 93 yards for a touchdown right up the middle. And my roommate, Dan Morin, made the key block right up the middle. Al Hunter cuts right off his block for 93 yards for a touchdown. So we exploded at that point, realized that we can play with Alabama, and not only just play with them, but we could beat them. And we go back and forth, lead change 7 times until the final 2 minutes and 40 seconds. And we're on the 8-yard line, and there's a timeout called. And Tommy Clements goes over to the sidelines, and Ara calls a tackle trap pass. I think Tommy was a little like, really? Tackle trap pass? But we knew, we had no thoughts about what Ara was going to call. If he's calling it, he's seen something that he feels that we can exploit. And we were going to go on a long count. Tommy came back and says, okay, we're going on a long count. Dave Casper, our All-American, our Hall of Famer, says, okay, guys, we're going on a long count. Nobody go offside. So we get down in our stance, and the flag goes up in the air, and everybody's going, all right, they went offsides. Casper went offsides, which was amazing because he never made a mistake like that. And then we're down on our 3-yard line. Ara said, send in the signal, same play. So he calls his tackle trap pass, and it's a fake to the halfback to the left, and Tommy Clements fades back and throws this pass to Robin Weber for about a 17, 18-yard gain. He carries it to out of bounds, and we then proceed to run out the clock. The thing was, there was about 3 guys on Dave Casper because he figured he was the guy who was going to get the ball. Robin Weber caught 1 pass all year, and that was that pass from Tommy Clements in that Sugar Bowl. And he, for the last 50 years, his athletic prowess has been that catch he made in the Sugar Bowl, which was a tremendous catch, and of course saved us the game.
There was a torrential rain earlier in that day. What were the field conditions like from the players' point of view?
Well, we had received these gold shoes from Puma. And everybody was excited to wear them because there was something very different than the black shoes that we wore. Now, most of the time in those days, it was mostly grass that we were playing on. There was a polyturf or AstroTurf at Tulane Stadium at that time. It was an artificial turf. Most of the time, artificial turfs were a little harder than playing on a regular grass, but it didn't matter. We tried the gold shoes. A lot of guys were slipping. Ara said, take those things off. We're going to go to Tulane and ask them if we could use their shoes. So we did, and we used these black shoes that were not as good looking as we felt, but they worked real well. They had more little studs on the bottom that would help grip the turf better in the wet weather. And for the game, though, it was kind of cool. I want to say it was in the 40s, but it didn't rain at that time. But it was the biggest obstacle was Alabama's defense. They were pretty good.
You mentioned in the book elevator conversation with Tom Clements before the game or the night before, where he was saying that he was feeling pretty good about the game.
Who was that?
Tom Clements, the quarterback, that maybe in the hotel. You had a brief conversation at the elevator with him that made you feel good about the win or good about the game?
Well, the thing about Tom was that he never talked a lot. He wasn't a guy that would BS about, oh, we're going to kill these guys or we're going to roll over them. He was somebody who was saying, hey, listen, the game, we can win this game. And if Tom was saying we can win this game, it gave us extra energy. I mean, he was a year younger than us, but really commanded a lot of respect from other people because we knew how competitive he was, how driven he was. And he didn't verbally express that a lot of times, but he physically did. He was somebody that was easy to follow because he was all in to win. And we felt that we were too. And he was our guy. I mean, Tommy Clements was our Sir Lancelot. Because if he was involved in something and he felt that we could win, we felt that there was no question that we had a legitimate shot to win this game. You gotta remember, Alabama at that time was so good, they would not substitute a halfback. They would substitute a whole backfield. You had Richard Todd was one quarterback, had his set of halfbacks and fullbacks. They ran the wishbone very well. And then they had Rutledge with another guy who was another quarterback that had another set of halfbacks and fullbacks. And they would run that thing to perfection. That's why in the first quarter, our defense held them to 0 yards total offense. That was quite an accomplishment, but that was short term. They piled on the yardage after that, but not so much that we were overwhelmed, but we won the game.
Did Ara have any message for the team prior to the game or at halftime? Do you remember anything he said?
That's an interesting concept about pregame talks. Ara would always say, you don't get the team ready with a pregame speech. You start the pregame speech the Sunday before in your meeting when you're explaining who you're going to play against. And he would outline every player on the other team to us every week. So we knew who we were going to play against and the kind of things that they could do. And Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, we're all watching film on our opponent. So we were building up a momentum. Thursday and Friday, Ara would give the team talks. And he would talk on Thursday, and it would never really be so much about football, but it'd be about how to be successful in life. And the thing I always felt that I missed not having a tape recorder there, because he would always talk about reaching for your goals, no matter what they were, about being a person that other people can count on and being responsible, all things that a father would tell his son or his daughter. You know, to be somebody that was trusting and a team-like player in whatever career they were at. So these were all life-enriching things that he would talk about. He might mix a sports story with it. We had these things called cheers, where they would have offense, defense, freshman team, prep team, and everybody would have a jingle that they would sing. And Ara would pick the winner. And then after that, he'd go, okay, guys, sit down. And then he would talk about these things, these life-enriching things. And they were always like, I can't believe the stuff that's coming out of his mouth. It should be on tape. And I would tell my roommate, Dan Morin, who had made that block in the on a return, and he said, yeah, boy, that was awesome. And then Friday, he would do the same thing. And then, of course, tell us what the schedule was for that night and then the next day. He never left us hanging on what we needed to do. He was always prepared in letting us know what we needed to do to have a cohesive blend of schedule. So we were always prepared, and that's a mark of a guy who is very successful if you're prepared.
I always think of the coach at halftime, like, yelling at the players or getting them psyched up. I can't imagine Ara doing that, at least just from the way you describe him. Did he have any message for the team at halftime during the 73 game?
I think in general, Ara wouldn't yell and scream, but he would get his point across. I don't want to say he was soft. He wasn't soft, but he was somebody that was encouraging as well. Like, hey, in order for us to win this game, we're going to have to do this, this, and this. And if we don't, we're going to get our butts kicked here. So you got to pay attention to this. And everybody did, because we knew if, again, Ara had a grasp on the whole scheme of things. He was somebody that you looked at and said, he's going to take care of this situation. If we do what he says, we're going to be victorious. We're going to be on the positive end of this. And no matter what the situation is, I think sometimes, you don't win. But you got to look at, did you give your best effort? Did you look in the mirror and say, hey, I did the best I could? Am I cheating the man in the mirror? Am I somebody that could have done this but refused to do it, therefore I wasn't successful? I mean, if you've dotted all your T's and dotted all your I's and crossed all your T's, there's nothing else you can do. You got to give your best effort. And I got to feel for Alabama because they played their hearts out in that game. And are we the national champion over them? Well, we did have one more point than they did, but they were awful good. And I had to say that, if there's a 1A and a 1B, that's what it was. Alabama was awful good. But Ara, in general, would always try to look at halftime as a time to prepare us for the second half, look at the things that we're doing wrong, try to fix them, and try to double up on the positive things we were doing. If we do this, we can beat them here. If we do that, we're going to lose there. So try to pay attention to what we're saying here. Don't just be, daydreaming. Be focused, be intense, listen to what the coaches are saying, and we're going to be successful.
Talk about the celebration after the game in the locker room after you realized you were national champions.
That's a pretty difficult thing to do because it almost seemed like it was surreal. We weren't in this situation. It didn't happen. You're struggling so hard to get to the top of that mountain. You're climbing every step and you're pushing yourself. And then finally, all of a sudden, they say, it's over. You won. Oh my goodness, I can't believe we won. And then you go into the locker room, you're celebrating. I don't know if reaching the top of the mountain is as important as the struggle of the journey. The journey is really the thing that you need to enjoy so much. And Ara used to tell us that. The journey is what's important. When you get to the top of the mountain, that's great. But the journey, the friendships you make, the successes you have, the hard work you're putting in, All those are part of this melting pot called the journey. And when you get to the top of that mountain, it's something you'll savor for the rest of your life. And not just savor the victory, but savor the friendships and the loyalties that you have towards each other. We just had our 50th year reunion at the Southern Cal game. And the amazing thing was we were all embracing each other as brothers that we've had for years. We haven't seen some of the guys in years, but some of the guys, whether they were starters or they were prep guys or second team guys, they were all part of the journey, all part of the thing that was so real to us, all part of the things that we helped each other, whether you were a starter or a backup. It was something that Ara wanted us to be a unit, and we were a unit. So those are the things that we found so important as far as the journey was concerned. And being at the top of the mountain was very gratifying, but maybe not as gratifying as the journey. The other thing that I'll remember about the celebration is that there was a guest that came into our room, our locker room, and that was Bear Bryant. And if you can imagine the place all of a sudden screaming and yelling, and then there was no talk at all. And Bear said to us, "Congratulations, you guys had a great game." He congratulated Ara personally, and then came over to Tommy Clements and said to him, "You are one heck of a football player." Because Tommy made some dramatic plays in that game, especially that third down out of the end zone. But Bear had a real manliness about him to come into our locker room and congratulate us at winning the national championship. I mean, it was really something that's hard to forget, because he humbled himself and said, "Hey, they won, and they did it fair and square. There was no, odd situation that happened that caused us to win the game. We won it fair and square." And he was man enough to come in and congratulate us, and Tommy Clements, which I thought was really kind of unique. But a comment Ara made at the podium when he was accepting the Sugar Bowl trophy. He says, "This is a great victory for the Irish, Notre Dame family." He said, "But it's also a great victory for college football, that you have two storied programs going at it cleanly as you can, and one of them coming out as a victory." But he says, Alabama is every bit as a champion as we are. If you look back at the video on YouTube, those are the comments he made, which was great. I mean, Ara was a very competitive man, but he was also somebody that did things fairly, humanely, and it was competition. It wasn't war. It was a football game. But the friendship he made with Bear lasted for the rest of their lives.
You mentioned a letter that Ara wrote to Bear after the game.
Ara what?
Wrote Bear Bryant a letter after the game?
Yes, if I remember correctly, he did, and telling him how a great game it was for two storied programs to play the way they did, and in a fair way, and there was no animosity between the two, but really there was a respect for both teams. So I thought that was great.
Talk about just your experience in New Orleans during that Sugar Bowl. I know there's a lot of parties and team events. Are there any memories that stand out to you from that time?
For me, and I think for most of the guys on the team, we weren't there to party. We were there to play the biggest games of our lives. This Sugar Bowl was huge for us. Playing against Alabama, I mean, if you're not going to play at a level that is going to be exceptional, you're going to get run over. So we felt that, hey, we have to play our best. Did I play my best? I don't think I did, but I tried my best. And I think every player that played on that team, if they had a bad block, it wasn't because they weren't trying, because they were trying. It was such a huge mountain to climb against Alabama. They were so good defensively and so good offensively. And of course, they had the Bear that was running over people left and right as far as their season was concerned. We were concerned about the Sugar Bowl. We weren't concerned about New Orleans as far as a place to party. It was a great place to play the game. The Tulane Old Stadium was very historic, and there was a certain feel to that. It almost seemed like, it reminded me of old Yankee Stadium with the trestles along the way, covering part of the crowd, and it was 85,000 people, and every one of them was energized to the last moment. So we had to be ready and focused. And if we lost that focus, something not very good could happen. And we never did. And we never gave up. Neither did they. So.
Talk a little bit about Ara's retirement. It seemed to come fairly suddenly. And you mentioned that he decided to take a sabbatical. Do you think he really wanted to retire, or was he forced?
Yeah, I think there was a lot of pressure on Ara. You know, one of the things that Ara said years afterwards was that he had 14 years of college experience as a head football coach at Miami and the Northwestern. And when he came to Notre Dame, he needed every one of those years of experience. And the thing that was so special for him is that when he was at Notre Dame, not only were you were pressured from the alumni to win, you were pressured from the media, you were pressured from the students on campus, you were pressured from the administration. So all these things started closing in. And after 11 years on that, if you beat Navy 35-14, why didn't you beat them 50-14 or 50-0? And so it wasn't just winning, but how much did you win by? So the pressure got to be greater and greater. And I think they give professors sabbaticals. And he thought that, boy, it'd be nice if I could take a sabbatical. I think at the time he was suffering from high blood pressure and wanted to take some time off. Maybe be with his family. He had a daughter, had an MS at the time, and wanted to spend extra time with her. Maybe the recruiting is a grind. In those days, you didn't have the communication skills that you have now. So I think it was something he had to be on the road a lot, and if he could take some time off. Well, he had a plan that maybe one of his assistants would take over, Tom Pagner or Paul Schultz. I think Tom Pagner probably would have been the personality that could have done it best. But they decided that they weren't going to give him a sabbatical and that they were going to go forward and hire a new coach. And that new coach was Dan Devine, who was a nice man. He was just a total opposite of Ara as far as charisma, as far as intensity. He was a much different character. He goes on and wins the national championship with a lot of Ara's players, which is, to his benefit, was great. I don't think he was involved, a hands-on guy like Ara was, but he was somebody that let his assistants do more of the coaching, and he just kind of orchestrated things. But it was a very disappointing time for the Notre Dame family of Ara Parseghian family, because we wanted the music to keep going. We wanted it not to die. And when Ara stepped down, there was an emptiness involved. We didn't know what was happening at practice anymore. We didn't know what was happening on Friday nights over at Moreau Seminary, because they started changing things. You know, every Friday we would go over to the grotto to say a prayer that we would do our best the next day and that nobody would get hurt on either team. But those things were kind of relaxed. And did they still give out medals? I don't know, because all those things started to become fuzzy. It wasn't part of our family. It was a new administration there that changed things. And I'm not saying they changed it for the worst. It's just not what we knew.
What's it like for you to accept this award on behalf of Ara?
I'm extremely honored to be able to accept this award for Ara. I would say he was the most influential man in my life, along with my father. My father was a New York City policeman, but before that he was a Marine, and had a lot of discipline involved in my upbringing. And he was in New York City policeman in narcotics. So he was always very worried that we would get involved in the wrong groups. But he was somebody that loved us very much and cared about us tremendously. He just passed away at 92 in May of this year, 2023. He was a good man. Ara, on the other hand, was somebody that we wanted to be like. His charisma was infectious. I would say he kind of mimicked somebody like the field, would be mimicking somebody like JFK. When Ara came into a room, you said, I may not know who he is, but I want to get to know him. He was good looking, he was caring, he was articulate, he was somebody that did what he said and not just verbally would approach people, but honestly deal with them whatever way he could to help them out. So it means a lot to me to be part of this presentation and accepting of the award.
I don't have any more formal questions. Is there anything that you didn't talk about that you think we should?
Well, I think the most important thing for me is over the years, this has kind of crystallized for me. The idea of Ara was always looking for people to have faith in themselves. Again, this isn't a religious thing, but this is more of a spiritual thing. Something that he looked into people and he found that they had a light inside of them. And he wanted to make that light as bright as he possibly could. In essence, he wanted to share with us how successful he became through having this light inside of him. The consciousness of the Creator making him do positive things all the time to help people. To share that with us, to see that light and maybe bring it lighter and brighter so we can affect more people. Almost like a disciple in some ways that we have become of him, to be able to try to draw that out of other people. It's a great message. It's something that I hope that my son is able to do that for people he knows. My son played at Michigan, but is now an artist. He did all the artwork in the book Ara's Nights. But he, through his own talents of painting, is bringing out pleasure to other people and showing positive things through his work. So all those things that we can do, even as far as animals is concerned. I mean, if you have a dog, you want to make sure that dog is treated as nicely as it can be, so it has a very nice life, and it's a kind dog to other people and to other dogs. So this is the kind of thing that I think if we could spread this feeling of making somebody else's life brighter through loving and caring that person. It's kind of an odd message coming from a football coach, but it's pretty good.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you so much.
Well, I hope it made sense.